Welcome to another edition of Hockey Unfiltered. I'm Todd Lewis, joined, of course, by former professional hockey player Justin Bourne. How are you, my friend? Ready to go again this week?
Oh, yeah, I'm good. How are you?
I'm really, really good. A couple of things that I want to touch on. One of them will be trades in a couple of minutes. But first, we're a little bit removed now from the latest edition of the NHL's outdoor extravaganzas, the Heritage Classic that took place over the past weekend in Calgary. I'm kind of wondering what your impressions are about these events. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they good for the league, teams, players? People will focus on how much money and interest they generate, the Crosby injury, and a few other things. So give me some thoughts. Tell me what you think and what the future might hold for these.
I think overall it's just a fantastic spectacle to watch. You know, you get the whole stadium and everyone's wearing their team colors and the retro jerseys, and it just looks so great, aesthetically pleasing. And I really don't think you can mess it up in Canada. There's going to be a buzz. I know Greg Wyshynski was on Twitter commenting on the lack of signage around town, but you don't have to advertise when something that big involving the NHL is in town. It'd be like advertising that the Stanley Cup playoffs is going on. Like, people are well aware. So, you know, I think you can't mess up the one in Canada, and you have to keep doing the Winter Classic, of course, in the U.S. with the tremendous success it is. I think that's sort of our saturation point. I think 3 games would be too many. I would definitely lose interest. So I think it's a good mix right now. And, it is a little harder, I guess, for the players. The ice surface isn't always perfect, but you know, players grew up playing that way, and to be a part of such a neat game, I think overall it's a good thing.
I agree with you for the most part. I think the games are going to be what they are. The highest caliber hockey, probably not, because they're outdoors and you're in the elements, and there's just so much that's variable. You had the rain in Pittsburgh, you had the extreme cold in Calgary, the ice was so brittle they didn't use Zambonis on it. The game is what it's going to be. The quality is never going to be an elite game that you'll make note of saying, oh, that was one of the best 1,230 games of the regular season. It is a great spectacle. I love the New Year's Day game. I really think it should be the only game on the schedule that day. That's your focus. That's your push. That's your one time to really promote and push the game. What I worry about with the Canadian part of this is there's only so many places you can hold it. Are you going to keep going back to Calgary or Edmonton or one of these places every couple of years? I just don't know that you need to have one every year. The other part I think is, and this is going to sound strange, but you've really got to expand some of the markets in the U.S. that you go to. We've had Pittsburgh, we've had Chicago, we've had Boston. I know that, you know, Buffalo was tremendous because it was the first event. It'll be in New York City. It will be great there. It'll be in Detroit. It will be great there. You have to start looking, I think, to some other unique markets. And everybody will make fun of California or a market like that. But if you can have one there, I think then you really push up the intrigue factor.
Yeah, and I think when you're saying with the Heritage Classic, there only is 6 NHL cities, but I think it's the perfect opportunity to go to some places that don't have an NHL team. You have so many Canadian cities clamoring to get a team. They want to see NHL hockey. If you had it in Quebec City, it's like having it in Montreal, so you maybe go back there your second time, but it would be jammed. It would be jammed in Hamilton, in Winnipeg, in so many places around Canada. So I think you can expand beyond NHL cities there. And I agree with you in the lower 48 for the Winter Classic. We actually, I met with a guy from the NHL offices who was saying they had a meeting and set the average temperature at that time of the city that they would hold the Winter Classic in. And so 55 degrees was as warm as they were willing to go in terms of a venue in in January that they could hold it. But I think, technology's only come so far, and the ice is, the ice-making capabilities is only going to get better, and I think as the years go on, I'm sure they could push beyond that. And, you could have it here in Phoenix, where I'm at. It's, it's 60 degrees in January. I'm sure someday we'll be able to have one out here, too.
I agree with you, and I really think that they should push the envelope and do them in those, non-traditional or warmer weather hockey markets, because you're right, you're not likely to get 80 and 90 degree temperatures in the winter months in Arizona or in Florida as well. If you're up towards the Tampa area. In South Florida, it'd be a little trickier, but the humidity would be the real trouble spot. If the temperature is reasonable, though, it could be done in a warmer weather market. That's for sure. I mean, hey, they had one in Vegas. It was a preseason game a few years ago with Gretzky and the Kings, but it can be done elsewhere, and it's much better now than it was then.
And the fans would be a little more comfortable if you're outside and it's
Yes.
60 degrees instead of minus 30 or whatever it was in Calgary. So yeah, they need to reach some sort of have it somewhere warm so the fans are happy, but keep the ice good. That's complicated, but it'd be great.
And the hockey would get better too. All right, let's talk about the fast approaching NHL trade deadline. You and I, of course, are going to be doing a special that day. It's going to begin at 1 o'clock Eastern, leading up to the 3 p.m. Eastern trade deadline, and will continue for another hour afterwards. But we had a flurry of activity leading up to and over last weekend with some deals that I think were kind of expected, namely the Thomas Caberlet to the Boston Bruins, but some others that weren't expected. That was a huge deal between the St. Louis Blues and the Colorado Avalanche, with some significant pieces trading spots.
Yeah, I think I actually wrote a column on this today for USA Today, about how it's tougher to acquire players through free agency these days because so many of the great players lock up long-term deals. So beyond drafting and developing players, it gets harder to improve your team if you're not making some real trades. And I think these teams, they gave those players some time to get to where they wanted them. Obviously, they weren't quite where they wanted them. And this whole change of scenery thing that we hear from analysts after trade, it's a legit thing, and it's not the scenery. It's a new system, new coaches, new teammates. Sometimes you get stuck behind a glut of players at your same position or a coach that doesn't let you play your game. And I think these players, their GMs recognize that they're great, talented players, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't working out. So this gave them both the opportunity to get some players in, from other teams that weren't quite working and see if they can plug in and find a better situation for them on different teams.
Agreed. And this is a trade. You talk about trying to find the best player in the trade. Well, there's a lot of good potential players in this St. Louis and Colorado trade. So it will take a long time to really judge this one to see if there is a clear-cut winner and loser. The best kind, I think, are still deals that help both teams. And perhaps this will be one of those deals. But I guess the other question is, how much activity is there going to be over the next while leading up to and finally on trade deadline day when we're doing our program from 1 till 4 p.m. Eastern?
I think there's a growing trend towards being a more active GM. Brian Burke has not had the most success in Toronto yet, but at the very least he's trying and he's interested in getting better. And as I mentioned, with the way the league is and how difficult it is to upgrade your team, I don't think we're done. Darren Dreger today reported a rumor about Goligoski and James Neal, another couple of young players who still have aren't fully developed. We don't know exactly how good they can be. So interesting to see these teams making these trades, and as you mentioned, hopefully they're the type of trades that can benefit both clubs.
And we've seen the tide shift on a lot of teams, too, even over the last couple of weeks, some that get closer and closer to playoff contention and decide, okay, we are going to make that push and try to add some pieces and really extend our playoff run or make it into the playoffs. And there are others that you thought were a lock a few weeks ago. Oh, maybe not so much. So general managers over the next day or two are going to be making their final assessments, final decisions to see which direction we need to go. I mean, the Florida Panthers, for instance, are probably going to, if not be the busiest, they will be one of the busiest teams leading up to and on trade deadline day, because Dale Talon began the remake of that franchise when he took over last summer, drafting 6 players with the top 50 picks, and that's only going to continue. So he has a lot of assets potentially that he could move.
Yeah, and they're in the process, as we speak, of getting shelled by the Islanders 4-0. I'm sure they're looking to move. It's going to be interesting to see which way clubs like say, the New Jersey Devils, they're sort of making this late season push now. They're 10 points out of playoffs with 1 game at hand of Carolina. They could be someone looking to improve, because if they make that little step and they get themselves in, all of a sudden you have a 7-8 seed who's just on a roll. You never know. We've seen it in the Eastern Conference before, so I'm curious to see which teams consider themselves contenders from how far out.
We saw it as recently as last season when the Montreal Canadiens snuck into the playoffs and knocked off the Penguins and the Washington Capitals in the first couple of rounds before knocking out the Philadelphia Flyers. You don't really think the Devils can make it, though, do you?
Well, hey, the Devils are a lot better than the Canadiens were last year. Marty Brodeur, and I really do think they can make it. I was actually looking at their schedule today. They have 3 tough games in their next 5, but after that they have Thrashers, Senators, Islanders, Thrashers, Senators, all of which I think New Jersey is better than, especially since they've been the best team in the East for a while now. So, I think they're going to get in.
Okay, that's going to be a fun one to watch, and we'll talk more about this on Monday. We'll have 3 hours together to do it. As mentioned again, it's from 1 o'clock Eastern to 4 o'clock Eastern, trade deadline day. Justin and me together for 3 hours, debating and discussing all of the deals that happen. We'll keep you updated and more. Follow us on Twitter till then, and we'll look for your participation. For Justin Bourne, our producer, Dave Turner, I'm Todd Lewis. Thanks for joining us. Back Monday starting at 1 Eastern.